there should be no law against killing people. I know it's a wrong thing, but...
It seems that during the high school years, you make a lot of friends. You may still have friends from when you were 15 or 16 years old, but sometimes those so-called friends have ulterior motives. And it seems that Cassie Jo Stoddart picked the wrong crowd to hang out with. Welcome to Guilty or Not, where we take a look at the world's most gruesome cases, analyse them, and try to figure out why the perpetrator did their horrible deed. Grab a cup of coffee or tea, find a cosy place, and let's dive into the case of Cassie Jo Stoddart. Welcome to Idaho, more specifically to the city of Pocatello. Its community is a peaceful one, and it's made up of mostly religious people, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Since it's a small town, Pocatello is considered one of the safest places in the entire state. But something happened in 2006. Pocatello was no longer considered the safe haven it once was. Oh no. There, one of the most horrific and disturbing murders took place. And it wasn't just the locals who were terrified and shocked about what had happened. The entirety of the US gasped upon hearing about what took place. Here in Pocatello, in 1989, Cassie Jo Stoddart was born. Just 3 days before Christmas, she was welcomed into the world and surrounded by love and support from her family. Cassie Jo was always considered a model student, getting only straight A's and never losing focus when it came to her studies. As she grew up, she became quite popular. Cassie Jo had lots of friends, and her life seemed genuinely perfect. If you'd asked anyone that knew her, you'd hear only praise when it came to her. Since she was so responsible and trustworthy, one day she received a request. It came from her aunt and uncle, Frank and Alison Contreras. Cassie was asked if she could house sit for them and also take care of their pets. The two were leaving town, and there was no one they would trust more than their niece. On September the 22nd, 2006, the girl went to her aunt and uncle's home. After the two left, Cassie decided to invite over her boyfriend at the time, Matt Beckham. It was around 6 p.m. when the boy arrived at the Contreras home, but he wasn't the only one who would come to keep Cassie company. Later that evening, two of her high school friends came over. Their names were Torey Adamcik and Draper. After setting out clear rules as to not mess up anything inside the house, all of them settled down and started to watch a movie. More specifically, Kill Bill Volume 2. But not long after the movie started, the last two boys to arrive at the house, Torey and Brian, said that they would much rather go to the movies and watch something there. So they got up and left, leaving Cassie alone with her boyfriend Matt. All of a sudden, the power went out. A feeling of uneasiness took over Cassie as the two were sitting in the dark. But fortunately, the power came back on shortly after. Nevertheless, something strange was about to happen next. As the lights came on, Matt noticed that one of the dogs was staring directly down the basement stairs. But that's not all that it did. It also barked and growled in the same direction. Thinking that maybe that's what dogs do, bark for no reason, he didn't think much about it. But Cassie still felt uneasy. So, being a caring boyfriend, Matt called his mother, asking if he could spend the night with Cassie so that she would feel safe. His mum wasn't a fan of the idea, but came up with another one. Matt's mum said that Cassie would be welcome to spend the night at her house so that the two teenagers would still be together. But Cassie said no. She was asked by her aunt and uncle to look after the house, and she could not leave it while they were still away. A couple of hours passed, and at 10:30 p.m, Matt's mum was outside the house waiting for her son to come out. As he came out, he called Torey to see if he and Brian wanted to hang out for a little longer. But as Torey picked up the phone, he started whispering, not being able to speak properly as he was supposed to be at the cinema. Matt couldn't understand what his friend was saying, so he put aside the idea and decided to stay home. After 2 days, her aunt and uncle, along with Cassie's cousin, returned home. The family pulled up in the driveway, and her 13-year-old cousin hopped out of the car. She was the first one to open the door to her home, the first image she saw was truly traumatizing. Cassie was laying on the living room floor. As her uncle checked her vitals, he noticed that her heart wasn't beating. In no time, the police quickly arrived at the Contreras home and started their investigation. Cassie's body was taken to the hospital, and upon conducting an autopsy, it was revealed that she was the victim of 30 stabbings, 12 of them being fatal. 3 days went by. The entire population of Pocatello was shocked. But the police made an announcement. It seemed that they made a connection to what happened to Cassie and even proceeded to arrest several people. Brian Draper and Torey Adamcik were the primary suspects. The 2 boys found themselves in custody, and a thorough interrogation started to take place. The locals didn't know how to react. The 2 boys were considered Cassie's friends, and they couldn't fathom the horrific scene that had just happened. The authorities started to find out several aspects that were linked to the boys. It seemed that they were considered outcasts by their peers. But Cassie had embraced them and considered them as some of her closest friends. It seemed that Brian spent most of his childhood in Utah. After his family decided to move to Pocatello, he met Torey at Pocatello High School. The 2 boys had an instant connection. This was due to their immense love for the cinema. The boys also had a camera that they used to film daily aspects of their lives. And Cassie, their friend, wasn't going to be let out of the home movies. She was featured in several shots they took at school and when they hung out after class. September the 27th came. Brian snapped, and the officers convinced him to take them to the place where they hid the items used in order to end Cassie's life. As they got to that particular area, a pair of black fingerless gloves was found among several knives, a videotape, a half-destroyed mask, and a partially burnt piece of paper with writings on it. Upon trying to figure out what the note said, the police were able to put together several sentences. It seemed that what happened to Cassie was not the result of aggressive impulse. Upon finding the note, it turned out that it was similar to a movie script. The boys planned out Cassie's fate, even detailing some actions they were about to perform on her, like chasing her down and stabbing her. The investigation did not stop there, and as the officers were digging even deeper, they discovered even more evidence against the 2 boys. It seemed that they used their camera to film Cassie on the morning of the day in which she gave her last breath. Also, footage of Brian and Torey was found when they were discussing what they had in store for the unsuspecting Cassie. They were saying that if you restrict someone from anything, then that person will only want it more. In the footage, they were referring to the action of ending someone's life. It seemed that when they first arrived at the house, and while Cassie gave them a tour, the 2 were particularly interested in the basement. Without being noticed, they unlocked the door so that when they would come back, no one would know they'd entered the house. The 2 also unlocked the back doors before leaving. It was all planned from the beginning. When they said they were going to go to the cinema, they left the neighbourhood only to return later and park down the street. Then, Brian and Torey put on masks and gloves while wearing dark clothes, and they went back to the house hidden in the darkness of the night. They entered through the basement door and cut the power from the electrical panel. The 2 waited for Cassie and Matt to come down to the basement and see what was going on. But seeing that they remained upstairs, they turned the power back on. When Matt left Cassie and called asking if they would hang out, his friend was already in the basement, and that's why he whispered, so he wouldn't be discovered. After they were certain that Matt had gone, they cut the power yet again. Brian slammed the door at the top of the stairs to startle Cassie. Then they made her even more scared, terrorising her for some time. Finally, Brian and Torey decided that enough was enough, and they proceeded to end her life. But the details would not stop. The investigators found more footage of the 2, in the car after committing the horrible act. As they were driving away, they filmed the road ahead and confessed to what had happened.
Maybe she's our friend, but you know what? We all have to make sacrifices. Our first victim is going to be Cassie Stoddart. She's going to be alone in a big, dark house, out in the middle of nowhere. How perfect can you get? I mean, like, holy shit, dude.
I'm horny just thinking about it.
Hell yeah.
The 16-year-olds were finally charged with first-degree murder. While being interviewed, the two best friends turned on each other, blaming the other person for what happened. While the trial took place, the eyes of the entire nation were on the small town of Pocatello. Now one single question remained. What was the motive for all of this? It seemed that Brian was inspired by Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, the two teenagers who carried out the Columbine shooting in 1999. And Torey said that his inspiration was the movie Scream. In 2007, on April the 17th, Brian Draper was found guilty, and less than 60 days later, so was his partner in crime. Brian and Torey received life in prison without the possibility of parole. Over the years, the two appeared in several documentaries, and in one interview, Brian revealed some disturbing facts about his friend's personality. It seemed that he had knives in his closet and even dabbled with animal abuse. This was the tragic case of Cassie Jo Stoddart. Let us know in the comment what your take is on it. Why were they focused on Cassie? Could it have been anyone? And also, did movies and stories that they were exposed to influence their judgment? We're very curious to know if you consider them guilty or not. Until next time, keep your eyes peeled all the time.